first, quick and dirty, let's go through some introductions. And I believe you guys share a little personal connection up here, don't you?
We do. Thank you. So, hi, everyone. My name is Meredith Carber Shagdar. I'm still getting used to the married last name, so please bear with me. I'm the Associate Director of Media at Sanofi Pharmaceuticals. Been there for about 3.5 years now, which is crazy to say. It feels like yesterday. But I'm really responsible for the development, execution, and analysis of our go-to-market non-personal promotional campaigns within our general medicines portfolio. So right now that includes a mix of diabetes, cardiovascular, and transplant brands. So it really does run the gamut in terms of the word general, but it keeps it interesting. Prior to my time at Sanofi, I spent about 9 years on the agency side, working across 4 different verticals, ranging from CPG to financial services, luxury goods, and then wound up in pharmaceuticals, which I'm so happy about. And within the pharmaceutical space have been working across 9 different therapeutic categories from my tenure starting on the agency side. But the story is Matt and I actually met back on the agency side. He was my boss. I found out later that my client at Sanofi at the time was his sister. And fast forward, I now work with his sister at Sanofi.
Now, Matt, how does that make you feel?
Oh, I don't know. It's kind of creepy, just like targeting, right? But
creepy. I haven't heard that one before.
Never. Matt Gunther, been doing this for a while. Actually, a few degrees of separation back in the back of the room. And my boss back in, we're just not going to go into years, but it's like 6 degrees of media here right now. But I work at CMI, manage a couple of large clients there in engagement strategy, covering oncology, weight loss, diabetes. So a lot of commonalities with some of the things that Meredith and I work on. But I've been doing this for a bit. And yes, she works with my sister, worked with me, and it's just a very small world. Really love the pharma industry.
Yeah.
So let's dive right in. What level of granularity is right for targeting? Is there such thing as too much or too little personalization?
Well, the way I think of it is like Goldilocks.
Okay.
That's kind of different, but you go too broad and you become too general. And you're not as relevant to the consumer or patient that you're trying to reach. You go too narrow and you become overcomplicated. You tend to do more targeting. Your messages may get lost. If you find that nice sweet spot in the middle where you're either looking at probabilistic targeting or lookalike targeting, where you're able to combine some of that claims data, some of this, some of that in a very privacy and compliant way, you find that sweet spot. Not too soft, not too. It's a great, happy place when it comes to targeting that you're not, violating the trust of the consumer, but you're also making sure that what you're doing is relevant to them.
Yeah, and I just put on that. I think ultimately everything boils down to who your customer is, right? I think we've talked about it already about centricity and customer centricity, patient centricity, HCP centricity. I think it ultimately comes down to their preferences. What do they need? Where are they consuming content? Who they are, within, there are so many different conditions with varying levels of prevalence across the United States. So I think that is first and foremost what we really need to, figure out, because that's going to identify, okay, what channels, what targeting parameters, what creative do we need to develop to, reach those individuals. Broader targeting makes a lot of sense for a condition or a disease state where there's a larger portion of the patient population in the United States, where there are, smaller subsets of the population that are struggling with a rare disease or, potentially some cancers, things like that. That's where you really need that level of granularity and specificity. And then that's just taking into account, the customer, the patient population. That doesn't even touch upon the indication, right? I mean, you're talking about sort of age groups, lines of treatment. There's so many different variables that come into it. So you first have to identify, okay, who am I trying to reach? What is the goal that I'm trying to accomplish? And engaging with them. What does that journey look like? And then you can start to identify, okay, what are the right personalization strategies that come into play to address that audience?
Have you guys kind of nailed down how you personalize across this mass market versus more specialty care, to your point, right? Is there levels of data that you look at between each of those different types of medications?
Yeah, I mean, I would definitely say that there is, it's an interesting mix, right? And obviously budgets come down to a lot of it. I want to be, fully transparent about that first and foremost. And all of us have, billions of dollars that can go towards TV advertising. But I do think when you have a patient population that, it's a diverse range of demographics, psychographics, preferences, you can play in a space where maybe broader channels make a lot more sense. That's where maybe some of your traditional formats may come in, where there's less targeting. I find it really interesting, kind of pulling from the non-pharma space. I read an interesting article about how the CFO of Mondelez, who like Oreos, Chips Ahoy, he actually made a statement saying that they're actually moving away. They're doing cost cutting measures within the data space specifically because they're much more focused on reach channels and dedicating all of their working media dollars to the media. And I find that fascinating, but it just goes to show that for a product that is consumed by the masses, they maybe have the freedom to do that a little bit more. I think the caveat though is when you do have a broader condition, maybe a larger patient population, much more diverse patient population, you really have to make sure that the creative that you're utilizing is a bit more nuanced. It's not going to be a one size fits all approach. So, like we talked about before, whether it's language, whether it's the imagery, patients, HCPs, they want to see them in the messaging that's being promoted. And I think that's really important when you're talking about a mass market medication. Um,
I mean, when you talk about the niche audiences, and I know some here, folks here are talking about the oncology space as well, you're getting into a very narrow group and being able to focus on what they're looking for. It's in some cases it's about adherence, in some cases it's about the clinical information, and tying that together and having the content they need, that educational content they need at that point, is beyond important. So whether it's someone with a mouth, talking about Motley and Oreos and chips and whatnot, targeting there, versus someone who needs a specific piece of information about, say, HER2 positive breast cancer, and they need to be reached in a specific way, specific tone, specific content is important. So those layers of targeting need to vary based on those different broad scale audiences, whether they're mass market or niche.
Yeah, and I think that's where too, when you're talking about like a niche patient population, where tapping into first, second, third party data providers are really imperative because there are so many nuances and so many elements that you have to take into account to really own in, or to reach, the most relevant individuals. I think that's where the data really is beneficial.
Well, I don't want to stop Erin for questions, but the data part is also important. We're in that world of privacy and adherence to certain rules and regulations. We can say MLR all we want, like we have to go through data pieces. First party data is probably the most important data piece that we can be using right now. And zero party data, when we can ask the consumers to actually volunteer that information through in a compliant way, of course. And to get that information, then we can customize what those journeys are. If we don't, I think we said it, Melissa mentioned in the last panel as well, is and Meredith touched on it, understanding the journey and then what data sources we have in order to fit within that. And then personalization is not just about targeting demos, it's also that content. And I don't know who it was way back when told me, when you talk about performance, which I know we'll touch on, is 50% of it is driven by the content you put on. The other half is your targeting or some derivation of that. We can, if your creative is going to work, it's going to continue to work. And because you're putting it in the right spot, it's half of it is your content. And if we're not tailoring it to the needs of the patients, then we're not going to be as successful as we want.
I don't think anyone will argue with you about the importance of first party data. How much are you guys thinking about leveraging that first party data, putting it into platforms versus letting the algorithms do their thing? Actually,
I think it's the balance. I mean, I think a lot of us in the room probably struggle with getting first party data, especially in this cookie depreciation world. I'm sure we've all had to put cookie disclaimers on our websites that have removed, 50, 60, 70% of our traffic that we've been able to see historically. So, obviously there is a challenge, but I think that's why, when you can start to identify strategies potentially to build up a CRM database, leveraging lead gen types of opportunities to engage and hopefully build that audience. I think that's really important. I think the other component is, once you get those individuals, you still have to nurture that audience. So I think there's an element of infrastructure as well that needs to be taken into account when we're talking about first party data. It's great if you want to have all of these people join a CRM list, but if you're not going to actually engage with them after the fact, then you're probably going to lose them at some point throughout the journey. So you have to really kind of think about that larger, strategy and the customer journey and what those people are going to need after they've obviously come, they've put in their information, which now we're very aware of and we're very sensitive to. So how are we going to provide them a meaningful experience that they are going to find value in and want to continue to engage? It doesn't necessarily have to be branded marketing materials, right? Like it can be patient support information, doctor discussion guides, things that aren't necessarily branded per se, but really just to continue to foster that relationship.
You talked about something really interesting. So you mentioned the nurturing of the people once you have them into your CRM and your data model, right? Is personalization more powerful in acquiring new customers or retaining your existing customers?
I think it's even beyond that. It's about trying to get more, right? So patient populations tend to grow over time, or should, based off of the testing that we're trying to get them to do. And I think that's the part that's missing there. It's like not just focusing on adherence, everything else. It's bringing more so we can treat more and have more people survive, versus having different stories about I wish or I could have, and getting that content in front of being able to talk to more people. And we talk about being more mass, but it's mass at a targeted level would be helpful. I think, yes, those two areas are important. I like to take it to the next level and try and reach people that are potentially going to be in those, secondary, tertiary bubbles to target.
Yeah. To answer your question, I think too, like it's both, right? Like you ultimately want to acquire new patients, but you also want to, there's obviously a journey, there's a customer journey, there are different needs throughout that journey. So personalization takes a different role depending on what stage you are in that journey. When you're trying to at the very beginning, when a patient maybe newly diagnosed or they're a caregiver to somebody who is, experiencing certain type of symptoms, more of those. So I should take a step back. Personalization, I think, takes on a lot of different meanings. You said that at first, it's channels, it's targeting, there's creative, and all of that is nuanced throughout the journey. So, going back to the example, you at the very beginning, awareness tactics are going to be much more of a focus. That's going to be, personalization. That's going to continue to evolve as we continue to nurture those audiences, hopefully to the point where they're going to go on a therapy that will ultimately help themselves or their loved ones. And then you want to make sure that they have, that care throughout, once they're on the therapy and providing those resources. So again, it takes on different shapes as you continue to engage throughout that customer experience, and both on the patient and the HCP side.
How are you both thinking about measurement when it comes to what tactic or way to personalize or target your campaigns is most impactful for your businesses?
I mean, everyone, when it comes down to measurement, I am targeting specifically what we're talking about here is the after effect, the lagging indicators of qualitative research. So I mentioned earlier about the creep out effect, like talking to them to see if it was did we go too far? Are we actually reaching them and talking to them in that respect? I think everyone here is doing some level of A/B testing, having their KPIs built and tracking those media metrics, those diagnostic metrics. But for me, it's the lagging piece to see, did we actually make that, have that action be taken, and to what extent? And then talking about it from a personalization standpoint, did we make that mark we were looking to land with them? Did they get the right content? Where are the gaps? And we can only find some of those things out after.
Yeah, I agree. I think, being able to identify what the goal is at each stage in the customer journey is huge. And once you've established what is that action or what is that outcome that we want them, with that, whether it's the HCP or the patient or the caregiver, whatever that outcome is, what is that KEI or KPI going to be? be that we're measuring success off of. And then obviously, that plays into the learning agenda and the measurement framework that you end up building out. But I think it's very important. I've found this, I think everyone wants to just say, okay, it's easier just to have one KPI that we're going to work towards, right? And in a lot of cases, the ultimate, business objective is to drive scripts. But that's not the role of every channel. And I think we have to be very realistic about every channel has different roles and responsibilities in that journey. And I think the other piece of it is, especially in this world where we're trying to do more with less, and everyone's talking about fewer, bigger, better approaches, there might be a vendor out there that can work across multiple channels, but their tactics might be different, have different goals depending on where that tactic falls in that journey. And I think as a result, you can just say, well, Google is going to have this KPI and we're going to call it a day, or Meta is going to have this KPI and we're going to call it a day. Like, no, there are different tactics that we should be employing. And as a result, we should be nuancing our measurement plans to that. And then to your point, the A/B testing piece comes in, say, okay, what was the most effective? Whether it's, what channels are we measuring effectiveness against? What targeting parameters are we measuring against? Creative effectiveness. And I think also just on the creative piece, from an engagement perspective, we all know, about, in the last 20 years, 80% of attention has been lost on screens. And we all, excuse me, I think we're all probably players in that to some extent. I know I am. And so it's like, okay, maybe those traditional metrics for attention or engagement with creative, maybe they're not the right ones anymore. There are a lot of new players in the space that are really focused more so in attention related metrics, and applying attention scores to ads, especially in the healthcare space where point of care marketing in particular is so difficult to measure. How can we start to think about measurement differently in these channels where maybe we haven't before? And we can use a lot of the technology to do that.
Creative's come up a couple of times in the conversation around personalization. So how are you guys integrating like DCO or modular content into your campaigns on the creative side versus the data side when it comes to targeting?
DCO side, it varies because you have to work with the variations of MLR, right, and come up with that formula for doing that. And I think it all comes back to the journey, being able to map that back. I think that's the most important piece for me in terms of the patient targeting. But from a dynamic, creative piece, you need to make sure you have that content behind it and be able to talk to them and understand what you're trying to say to them. It's not really a crapshoot. It depends on which space it's oncology versus weight loss. You have to be able to speak to them in different ways and create sub-segments within those. And to my earlier point about not getting too specific and creating too many micro segments, being able to put that out there. I mean, TCO has been out there for a bit now, and it's not just about the text message or the text change or the visual. It's making sure the information that you're getting and where you're sending them to is right along the journey.
Yeah, and I think, what we found really successful, and we're still in the infancy phases, but, taking core claims, making sure that the marketing materials that we're basically distilling into can be modularized and then repurposed for DCO purposes. Again, kind of going back to doing more with less, DCO is a great form of technology that we can utilize to iterate content at scale and really personalized. So it kind of kills multiple birds with one stone, if you will. And so we've dabbled in DCO for a few brands where we've gone to 100% digital pure play model, and have leveraged, in the absence of a creative agency, DCO to build out a lot of our content, keeping in mind, we had this root, piece of marketing materials that we had, gotten approved that we were then able to iterate upon, based off of time, location, a variety of different factors based off of who is being exposed to the audiences.
Personalization is really a kind of maturity scale for a lot of brands, whether you're in your infancy from the creative side or the PDP side up to the advanced targeting. What are y'all's low hanging fruits, right? What are the table stakes when it comes to personalization today?
Know your target, know your journey. I mean, it's like beating a dead horse with this piece, but it's if you know, keep it basic. Everyone wants to jump in and start doing the 2 letters AI and go crazy with, um, you know, making variations of everything and going crazy with it. I think you just need to understand where your patients are, what they need, and create that path forward. You know, everyone wants to jump down to the next shiny thing, right? And do the next fun thing. For me, it's keep it basic because the stuff that we did, we even talked about it at dinner last night, the stuff that we did, gosh, 20 years ago, we're just doing it faster. And it's the stuff that we came up with then was very um, strategy, and what we're doing now with some of this technology is being allowing us to do things faster, but keeping that human intelligence piece applied to it.
And I think too, kind of pulling that through to a tactical perspective, right? I mean, 100%, you need to know your audience, you need to know what you're measuring for. And then that obviously, whether that's channels, targeting creative. But like if you're doing programmatic advertising, you're already in the personalization space and automation space. If you're doing responsive search ads, congratulations, you're already doing it. Some brands that I've seen are starting to take, keywords that are being used within the paid search space and then personalizing their websites as a result of those who have engaged with specific pieces of content. So I think there's already some very like low hanging fruit A/B testing. I think to your point too. I mean, however you want to test A/B testing, another way to do it. But to your point, I think sometimes we want to throw all of these variables and do 5 things at once. Uh, and
Was that
really,
thunder or?
uh,
I think we're all ready for lunch, right? Someone's stomach is
I
really
agree.
growling.
Yeah. So
Meredith, I think those examples are really grounding for all of us. It's like we have to think we're these most advanced or we're personalizing down to the individual consumer, right? But to your point, there's already so many things that many people in this room are doing that are personalized and targeting. So last question before we open it up, like what's the next frontier? What are the things that you guys are forward looking to add more meaningful targeting into your campaigns?
My thing is the automation. I love the technology piece, but automating the right things. I'm not automating. I think Melissa mentioned it before. She mentioned flowcharts and GRP. Let's not automate that. I love those things, but
You love flowcharts?
media long enough. There's exactly who doesn't love a good flowchart? It's being able to automate the simple things so that way we can think more, and I think that's happening more and more right now. And when we can embrace those things are allowing us to do, will allow us to think more and create these personalization journeys and make them more relevant to each one of your brands, things like that. That to me is the right use of the automation, not this. It's going to answer every question for me or solve every problem.
yeah, I mean, we didn't touch too much on the AI side, but I'm excited for how AI is going to play into a lot of things. From a content creation perspective, I'm waiting for the day internally where we can, build out to spec social creative that takes into account all of the ad copy parameters. Like right now, a lot of that is, human led. That's fine, but everything is open source at this point. So how can we make like the content development piece much more automated? And obviously that reduces timelines, and we can create more iterations of content. So I think there's that piece. I'm also excited just about how AI is being used just in like text analytics. So like how we can scrub across the web. We talked about social listening before, but how can we like really look at customer sentiments to not only have a better understanding of who our audiences are, where are they engaging, how do they want to be engaged with, but then also kind of pulling that through to chatbots, for example, right? Like, I think with AI, we so much look at the bright shiny object, and we're like, okay, we want to do all of these things, but does it actually serve a purpose that's going to be beneficial to the end user? And a lot of the times, it's something that we find really cool, but maybe not like what the end user is going to find helpful. So how can like chatbots, using user generated content actually inform or direct individuals to content that's going to be the most beneficial for them, instead of just regurgitating something that we want to tell them. So between all of that, and then just from the I'm excited. I love EHRs. If you talk to me more, you'll know I geek out about this stuff. But I'm excited how like AI is going to scrub unstructured notes, hopefully, to be able to do a better job of identifying patients maybe earlier on in the treatment journey and being able to help communicate with HCPs in those moments to help them to start thinking about, okay, maybe there is another theory here that we need to explore. I mean, I could go on and on, but I'm really excited about like where the industry is headed. I know there's a lot of negatives to AI and how it can be used, but I think there's a lot of good that can be done in a lot of ways.
Next time we'll have a whole panel about the good and the bad of AI, but first we'll open it up for audience questions.
Retail spectrum science. Meredith, you said something that really spoke to me as an agency person. You said every channel has its role, and not every channel is necessarily meant to deliver, the end action that you want users to take, or patients in our case. Do you find it challenging to justify investment in some of the channels, and how do you manage internal expectations?
That is a very good question. Yeah, I mean, so we obviously, I think a lot of us in this room probably leverage the Crossix, IQVIA's own internal media mix modeling, reports to validate investments. So, I think it's a bit of art and science, and that's what we have to continue to educate internal stakeholders on. I think a lot of times, especially maybe our advanced analytics teams want to see things in black and white. And so it's very important to be able to provide a little bit more color into why you're not seeing the ROI numbers as high as maybe some, in another channel. I think point of care is a great example of that, where a lot of the times you're using one, one variable, one number, so the number of offices, for example, as your, indicators like impressions, right? And because those numbers aren't changing on an ongoing basis, your ROI numbers sometimes don't look good based off of the model that you might be running. So it's very easy to say, oh, we're gonna cut point of care. I was like, well, no, yeah, like let's think about this. Let's talk through the role of point of care and what it's designed to do. I think we all know like measurement there is not as granular or advanced yet. I think it's getting there. So I think to your point, it's that they're conversations and they're tough conversations, but I think everyone comes together and I realizes that and then tries to work towards a future solution. I think that's key.
I think we have time for maybe one more quick question.
Hi, great presentation. Andrew from LiveRamp. My question is, how do you balance audience quality in terms of measurement, audience quality versus creative and messaging? How do you kind of satisfy those two variables?
Audience quality. I think a lot of that has to just, it's a balancing act between the two and making sure that we have the quality data to fuel that. It's a tough one to navigate because not all the data that we have is necessarily usable or compliant. So we have to make sure that what we have can be onboarded within the systems and executed against. And then the creative piece of things just tie into that as well. We have to make sure we have variable to tie into it.
And I would just also say, if somebody tells me one more time that I have a really efficient CPC or CPM, I'm going to lose it. I hear that so many times, and I think audience quality is or deeper engagement related metrics are huge. I would much rather see that somebody's spending more time on my website. There's a higher engaged user rate. The audience quality metrics that I'm getting through my third party attribution partners are strong. For somebody just telling me, well, this partner had a 25-cent CPC and this one had a 75. Therefore, we're going to cut the 75-cent CPC. Like, I don't care about that as much. You tell me it's a $5,000 CPC, we'll talk about it later. But I think that's the other piece is like it's a balance, right? And I think audience quality is a really great tool to hopefully, validate that you're not only reaching a broad audience, or not a broad audience, but just reaching an audience, but you're reaching a more qualified audience.
Meredith, Matt, thank you guys so much.